Since my last Kooyong video, Josh Frydenberg has been a very busy boy indeed. Let's pick up where we left off. Charitygate. Charitygate saw CEOs of charities throw their names and brands behind Josh. Guide Dogs Victoria stood down their CEO pending an internal investigation over her Frydenberg endorsement, while the CEO of the Breast Cancer Network of Australia also found herself under the microscope. While the charity put out a tweet to say they did not endorse an individual politician or political party, here's the clip that aired on Sky News for you to judge yourself.
Josh has always been at the end of the phone call for me, whether it's policy questions, questions on superannuation and access for cancer patients, or just about local issues. We've had such a wonderful relationship with Josh.
Then there was Kate Sayers, founder of the Inclusion Foundation. Kate appears to have been cleared by the foundation's chair, who just so happens to be her husband. Interestingly, they've run with the personal endorsement defence, which, like I said in my last video, is a fairly loose one. If it's a personal endorsement, there's really no need to include the charity name. As Charitygate disappeared, news started to pick up around the Kooyong Candidates Forum. The forum has run for the past few elections and Frydenberg has been happy to attend. In fact, when he's spoken at them in the past, he's spoken of his cordial relationship with the organisers.
Carolyn and Lighter Footprints have always had an opening into my office and I've enjoyed the interactions with them, and that is why I'm here today.
Not this year though. The thought of fronting up to the community forum seemed to have spooked him. Look, I can see it from his point of view. With the community forum putting climate change front and centre, having to front up when your own dysfunctional party is in constant conflict over the issue and can't present a coherent plan, well, you're probably not going to have a great time. Just as Josh was starting to feel the heat for snubbing his own community, in rode his white knight, Chris Ullman.
I'm here to rescue you.
Out of the goodness of his own heart, I'm sure, Chris volunteered to host a debate at Channel 9 in Docklands. And what's more, it already got Frydenberg to agree. Now that's convenient. What a generous and compelling offer. Shortly after, Chris broke the big story that Monique Ryan had declined.
Yeah, but that's not the whole story.
Oddly though, for a journalist with his experience, Chris had opted to leave out some of the story. Monique Ryan was more than happy to debate Frydenberg on Channel 9, provided it was held in Kooyong, with questions asked by the people of Kooyong. I mean, that's a novel concept, debating in front of the people you're running to represent. There was radio silence from Chris on this counter-offer. Then Josh pops his head up later in the day to put his own spin on events. Channel 9 and nonpartisan?
You can't be serious!
You don't often hear Channel 9 and nonpartisan used together these days. I just can't imagine why. In his statement, Frydenberg said he welcomed a fair and balanced debate in a non-partisan forum about the important issues facing his community. I mean, these were all nice words, but why then was he so intent on trying to bully a single candidate into attending a debate held at Channel 9 studios well away from his own electorate?
I think we both know what's what.
He then went on to reference the organisers of the Kooyong Candidates Forum, who he's previously spoken about positively.
I've enjoyed the interactions with them.
In his statement, he repeats the story of someone storming the stage at a previous event. The story is repeated quite a few times.
In previous years, I've attended that forum, even though one year someone tried to storm the stage, which what they said was a bucket of bleach to throw over me. Fortunately, it wasn't, and law enforcement prevented them.
So I tracked down the footage from that event, which was held in 2016. Here's the incident in full.
From 2013, before being promoted as the Minister of Resources, Energy and Northern Australia.
Some bleach to help him with targeting the coral reef and help him in his journey through destroying the reef. So, Josh, we've got some lightning.
After hearing the story of someone trying to storm the stage with a bucket of bleach to throw over him, I have to say I was expecting a little bit more. It was less storming and more walking. And it wasn't really a bucket, that was more of a prop. Regardless, I don't think that sort of thing should happen at a public forum, no matter who the candidate is. Really doesn't achieve anything, and as we're seeing 6 years later on, all it's done is given Frydenberg another reason to dodge his electorate's public forum.
When you go to that website, what you would have found is that the people who are responsible for the Lighter Footprints administration.
So I went to the Lighter Footprints website as per Josh's instructions, and I looked up the committee.
When you go to that website, what you would have found is that the people who are responsible for the Lighter Footprints administration are people who include 2 former Greens candidates.
To be fair, it appears as though one of the committee ran as a Greens candidate in the 2014 state election, running against Frydenberg's protege.
I'm an idiot.
I'm unsure as to the second person he refers to is though.
The major backer and promoter and advocate for Monique Ryan.
If anyone knows which member of the committee is the major backer he's referring to, please let me know in the comments.
Another person who promoted my vandalised core flutes and, in this case, billboards on social media.
Again, not real sure who he's referring to here. It's worth noting Frydenberg is not the only candidate to have had their boards vandalised. More on that later.
And then the person called Michael Staindl, who challenged my eligibility to sit in Parliament under Section 44 after the last election, which was a despicable act. And fortunately, not only did he lose, but the court found against him unanimously and awarded costs against him. And he's been one of the key organisers of this Lighter Footprints.
Now, this one just doesn't appear to be true at all. Michael Staindl has stated on Twitter that he has not been a member of Lighter Footprints for almost 3 years. For their part, Lighter Footprints released a statement saying that they are a non-partisan climate action group that engages with the community and advocates to all levels of government on climate action. For all his bluster, I believe that the reason Frydenberg did not want to attend the forum is much simpler than any of the reasons that he put forward. In terms of action on climate change, his government has been an abject failure, and they appear to have no policies in place to turn things around anytime soon. It's worth noting that the Greens candidate did offer to debate Frydenberg anywhere, anytime. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear as though Frydenberg's going to take up that offer. Regardless, Sky News jumped at the chance to set up a debate in Kooyong, to which both candidates agreed. So the Kooyong Candidates Forum went ahead without Frydenberg.
If you want to run for public office, don't run away from an interview or a debate.
The link to the full video of the forum is in the description.
Could we just hand one over?
I'll have
Thank
Josh's.
you.
I don't think you need them.
Anyway, I digress. So where was Frydenberg during the candidate forum? He was about 100 metres down the road at a pub working on his grubby Type 5.
She goes, I'm Monique Ryan,
Tight.
Frydenberg then went on a media offensive, appearing on anything that would have him, to continually repeat a couple of the same misleading and deceptive points he'd been parroting for a while.
They're campaigning on transparency, yet they will not tell the people of Kooyong how they would vote in the event of a hung parliament. Hung parliament, hung parliament, hung parliament, hung parliament. They're not revealing how they will vote in the event of a hung parliament.
This one is blatantly false. It's a point that Dr. Monique Ryan has had to refute so often, even I could recite the answer.
In terms of accountability, are you not being accountable in not telling the voters of Kooyong, in the event of a hung parliament, which side of politics you'd support if you win?
Not at all, Michael. I've been extremely clear about this. I have said who I would support in terms of the major parties were there a hung parliament. I would support whichever of the major parties was willing to come to the table on what the people of Kooyong want, which is effective action on climate change in the next 10 to 15 years and a strong federal ICAC.
I don't think the answer could be any clearer than that. The problem is when someone in a position of power repeats the same lie over and over again, it doesn't take long for the media to pick up on it and start reporting it as fact. Then there's this one.
They're a former member of the Labor Party, a long-standing member of the Labor Party. I'm up against a fake independent who's a former member of the Labor Party. In the case of Kooyong, I'm up against a former long-standing member of the Labor Party who sought to obscure that fact. She's a former long-standing member of the Labor Party. She sought to conceal it. The so-called independent, who's a former long-standing member of the Labor Party, something they sought to conceal in an interview with you when they were asked directly about their political background.
They didn't. Monique Ryan did not mention that. That's true, but I don't think long-standing is accurate. But anyway, go on.
So while there may be an element of truth in Frydenberg's talking point there, he leaves out a few crucial points. I'll leave Dr. Monique Ryan to explain the circumstances herself in this clip from 3AW.
Need to clear up. You were asked, what is your political background? Your answer was, quote, I have none. You didn't disclose you're a member of the Labor Party. Was this an oversight or was it strategic?
No, look, I think it was a bit unfortunate, that whole thing. I did and still do consider myself a political Klanskin because I've never been part of the political process to any significant extent. I did join the Labor Party in 2007 because I believed that Kevin Rudd was going to take action on climate change. I never attended a meeting of the Labor Party, and I let that membership lapse in 2010 because I was hugely disappointed by the failure of the government at that time to take any effective action on climate change. So 3 years, more than 15 years ago, is hardly, long-standing Labor Party membership, and I think it's a bit frustrating that that's the only thing that Mr Frydenberg wants to engage with me upon.
But you were a member of the Labor Party.
Yes, and I never denied that. I was never asked that question specifically until the second interview that I ever had, which was with Hamish McDonald on the project in the week that I declared my nomination, and I told him then. I never denied it, and to say that I did is inaccurate.
Okay, let's summarise the key points. Dr Ryan never denied being a member of the Labor Party. She has said she was a member for 3 years between 2007 and 2010. For me, that does not meet the definition of a long-standing member. Dr Ryan never attended any meetings. Dr Ryan let her membership lapse when she became disillusioned with the party's lack of action on climate change. For reference, here's a short clip of Dr Ryan's second ever interview in December 2021. This was the week she declared her nomination.
So what's your political background?
I have none. I'm a Klanskin.
Monique admits she was a member of the Labor Party for 3 years, but she quit in 2010 when Kevin Rudd went soft on climate change. Your opponents will say you're a Labor person.
Yes. I'm not wearing the same jumpers I was wearing 10 years ago. I'm not. I don't have to toe any party lines. I am a true independent, and that gives me a lot of freedom.
There's been a lot made of the clean skin label, but personally I feel that's a fair description. Just being a member of a political party isn't a big personal investment. In the case of the Labor Party, you pay an annual membership fee and that's it, you're a member. Some parties, I'm looking at you Uncle Clive, have an even lower barrier to entry. Hell, you may be a member yourself already and not even know it. So membership in the way in which Dr Ryan appears to have been a member doesn't mean much in my book. If that's all Frydenberg has on his opponent, then I think it's fair to describe her as a clean skin. It's funny. I don't seem to think he kicked up as much fuss last election when he was running up against an independent that was a former member of the Liberal Party. I guess you need to look at what Frydenberg's goal is. And his goal is simply to throw enough Labor mud in the hope that some of it sticks. Because he knows that in an electorate like Kooyong, very few people would be able to bring themselves to vote for a candidate smeared with Labor mud.
Josh Frydenberg wants to debate you on Channel 9 ahead of the election. You haven't agreed. Why not?
I've had 3 or 4, I think, community forums where I've debated the Labor and Greens candidates for Kooyong in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Mr Frydenberg has not attended any of those, although he was invited to all of them. Last night we had a fantastic community forum at the Hawthorn Town Hall where those other 2 candidates and I met with and spoke with the voters of Kooyong. While we were there, Mr Frydenberg was 100 metres down the road at the Glenferrie Hotel. He is avoiding the people of Kooyong. Why would Mr Frydenberg, who, as you say, is a senior member of this government and a very senior politician, why does he feel so threatened that he has to do this on his terms outside of the electorate in conditions that he can carefully control? Why does he feel so threatened, Patricia?
A question I'll ask him, and he's been invited onto the program. Absolutely, and I think it's important.
Unfortunately, Patricia didn't ask Frydenberg this question the following day when he appeared on her program. She did ask this one though, which I feel gives us a fascinating insight into Frydenberg's values.
Why are you preferencing one nation over this independent then, if you're a moderate?
Well, because my preferences are not going to make any difference in the seat because it's going to...
But the symbolism matters. The symbolism matters.
Well, no, it doesn't.
It does matter, Josh. It tells us everything we need to know about your values. Here's Frydenberg's how to vote card. While you may not notice it straight away, one thing to point out is that Frydenberg doesn't show party affiliations against each of the Kooyong candidates. I'm sure that's no accident. I guess he doesn't want to make it clear that by following his how to vote card, he's asking you to preference the United Australia Party, the Liberal Democrats, and Pauline Hanson's One Nation. That's right. He'd rather align himself, at least symbolically, with the UAP and One Nation, rather than Labor, the Greens or Independent. Now contrast Frydenberg's how to vote card with his opponent's. It's a stark contrast. We've continued to see the media run with Frydenberg's talking points, without actually interrogating them to see if they're true. Like this one that got picked up by the press and television.
You've attended fundraising events. I think at Brunswick was the most recent one you went to, well outside the seat of Kooyong.
Okay, so I have not attended any fundraising events in Brunswick. Mr Frydenberg keeps trying to smear me with some attendance at a private function which was held by some friends of mine. It was a fundraiser last week. I was not at it. Right. And I have not attended fundraisers when I've been invited to community forums.
Again, it appears fairly easy to refute. However, Frydenberg's able to spray his narrative far and wide. And if his untruths and exaggerations are corrected, they're rarely receiving the same volume of coverage. You could tell that Frydenberg's campaign was getting desperate when they started plastering "Keep Josh" everywhere. Interestingly, the newer campaign material dropped the Liberal branding altogether.
Mr Frydenberg, of course, who's a man touted by some as the next Liberal leader, has dropped Liberal branding for some of his billboards. He's adopted the independent colour teal in some of his campaign material as well, which are both sort of pretty worrying signs for his party.
The walking billboards were a nice touch. As I've seen pointed out a few times on Twitter, Frydenberg seems to have found a way to pay his walking billboards more than the average aged care support worker. To coincide with Josh Keeper, there was the massive Herald Sun promotion for Josh Frydenberg. I think the Herald Sun have long stopped pretending to be an actual news organisation, but if you still had any doubts, I think this should probably put those to bed. A front page double spread on why people should vote for Josh is not news. It's propaganda. I wonder if this sort of thing actually counts as in-kind sponsorship. Then there was the signage stuff. It's fair to say both sides have had their cornflutes graffitied, but it's also fair to say that the attacks on Dr. Ryan's boards have been a little bit more coordinated. I mean, who would go to the effort of getting hundreds of A3 stickers printed, trying to link Monique Ryan to the Labor Party and then plastering them all over Monique Ryan's boards? Signage has been a hot topic again in this election campaign, and not just in Kooyong. Pretty much any seat where an independent is running has seen some level of shenanigans. If you're looking for an additional dose of signage drama, check out the latest video from Knights in Shining Llama, focusing on the Tim Wilson versus Zoe Daniels signage battles. Links in the description. Then there was his mother-in-law material that he was continuing to roll out.
In her 70s, I think, came up to me and said, "Josh, I'm voting for you." I said, "That's very nice." And she goes, "I'm Monique Ryan's mother-in-law."
While he obviously thought it was a cracking good yarn, it was grubby and unnecessary. Virginia Trioli really skewered him on this issue too, which was refreshing to hear.
What kind of a candidate makes the sober decision to go, I'm going to stand up in public and I'm going to try and humiliate a woman and wedge her against her own mother-in-law?
Well, a very nice lady approached me, and she has been telling the same story to multiple people.
I'm asking
in the area
about your decision.
Your
decision to stand up and tell that story. It's a nice story to publicly humiliate a woman with her own mother-in-law.
Well, I don't accept your characterisation of that.
But that's what you did. You don't accept that that's what you did?
No. And firstly, the other
Monique
side...
Ryan should just see that story and laugh and roll her eyes and say how charming. You're comfortable dragging someone's family political divisions into the public realm. That's a choice that you confronted. You could have looked at it and gone, great story, but I won't use it. It's a bit, ugly to do that. But you thought, yeah, let's go for it. What about this? Monique Ryan put this on Twitter yesterday. My 87-year-old mother-in-law is receiving unwanted and distressing phone calls from strangers. This is what happens when Mr. Frydenberg drags my family members into his political campaign. Do you have any regrets about doing that now, given that's been the upshot?
I don't have any regrets.
The full exchange runs for over 4 minutes and consists of Trioli running through him like one of ScoMo's chicken curries, with Frydenberg occasionally interjecting with a but or what about. Now this brings us to the great Sky News debate. Now I'm willing to admit when I first heard about this, and the fact that it was going to be hosted by Sky News, I could feel the voice of Admiral Akbar shouting out to Team Monique.
It's a trap!
But by the time the debate had finished though, I couldn't help but think that it didn't go the way that Frydenberg would have hoped. I'll take a look at some of the key moments.
Please put your hands together for Treasurer Josh Frydenberg and Dr. Monique Ryan.
This is an alpha move if ever I've seen one, pulling the doctor into his personal space. It's a classic douchebag manoeuvre.
Now, we committed at the Paris Agreement to reduce our emissions by 26 to 28% by 2030 on what our emissions were in 2005. That was the benchmark. To date, our emissions are down by 20%.
Look, the coalition basically roll this 20% figure out every day.
I mean, Australia has reduced our emissions by more than 20%.
But the fact of the matter is, suggesting we've reduced emissions by 20% is highly misleading. An emissions reduction figure can be manipulated in so many different ways, and it also depends on where you're taking your baseline from. The other thing to add is to suggest that the coalition has reduced emissions by 20% is not true either. Taking the data that the coalition used to form their 20% figure, the fact is the greatest reduction in emissions occurred when the Labor government were in power. The 20% figure also includes reductions caused by the pandemic, and now that we're pretending the pandemic is over, those gains will be quickly lost. The coalition are also using data that runs up to 2020, whereas the countries that they're comparing us to are only using data up until 2019. When you compare apples with apples, Australia's performance is really not that impressive. Going one step further though, if you exclude the LULUCF data, which will give us a far more accurate picture given that not all countries have valid LULUCF data in the first place, and by its nature, LULUCF data can be somewhat manipulated, Australia's performance is definitely not something to brag about. In fact, our emissions have actually gone up. I can see why the coalition wouldn't want to talk about that.
We're defined by our actions, not by our words. Mr Frydenberg, in the 12 years that he has been our member for Kooyong, although Liberals have the ability to do this, has never crossed the floor on a matter of conscience. He's voted to keep refugees offshore. He's voted in favour of a religious discrimination bill which would have targeted the most vulnerable members of our society. If you want action on climate change, you can take action on that. You can cross the floor, you can take action on those things. But this is a man who votes with Barnaby Joyce every time.
Treasurer, are you being held back by others in your party? You remain a largely popular figure in Kooyong, Victoria. Are you being held back by the views of others in your party?
Well, I feel very privileged to be not only the member for Kooyong and the Treasurer, but also the Deputy Leader of the Liberal Party.
This is typical of how Frydenberg handled this debate.
The point is, I am who I am. But unfortunately, when Monique Ryan was asked about her political background, she concealed the truth. She was asked, did she have a political background? And she said she had none. She said it was
He evaded answering any remotely tough questions and instead used his time to try and deflect and smear his opponent.
The fact that we have had a faster and stronger economic recovery than any other major advanced economy in the world is not luck.
The coalition have rolled this one out, or a variation on the same theme, quite a few times now. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear to stack up to fact-checking.
A strong economy, strong economy, strong economy, strong economy.
For me, this exchange best summed up the debate. Heading into it, Frydenberg could well have been forgiven for thinking a debate around issues such as the economy would have had him pegged as the favourite. Unfortunately for him, his government's track record does not stand up to scrutiny.
Everybody strap in!
We've got a $1 trillion debt. The deficit is this year with the current budget is the largest in our lifetime. Inflation is rampant. We've just had a first interest rate rise in 10 years and we know that there's more coming. The price of everything is going up and in real terms our wages are going down. Tell me how that is a successful economy. If we just look at Mr Frydenberg's JobKeeper, $88 billion was spent. We needed a stimulus, no question asked. But $38 billion of the $88 billion went to companies that did not need it.
That's not true.
While he may not like it, the Parliamentary Budget Office found that at least $38 billion of JobKeeper went to companies whose turnover did not fall below the threshold.
All children have now been removed from detention.
As far as I'm aware, the Billa-Wheeler family are still being held in community detention, unless they've been quietly released in the last couple of weeks.
So it was brought up earlier about the prospect of a hung parliament, and no one's ever really been able to explain to me why that might be a bad thing.
Well, look, I would argue that we've had a minority government for a long time, and that the current Liberal government is a minority government to the Nationals, and is being held to ransom by the National Party, and its policies are being driven to the right by the National Party. And that Mr Frydenberg, because he is a hostage both to Barnaby Joyce but also to his own political ambitions, has not felt himself to be in a position where he could act against the National Party. And I think that that has been to this country's detriment.
I mean, it's obvious to most that the Liberal Party is being held hostage by the Nationals, and they have been for quite some time. The coalition is a package deal, that's a fact. If you vote for Frydenberg, you're also getting Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan. This is something that even Carl can recognise.
A vote for the coalition is a vote for Matt Canavan.
If you look at what independents have achieved in the last 3 years, when we haven't had a hung parliament, the only bill that's been taken to Parliament on climate change was Ali Steggall's bill, independent. The only bill that's been taken to Parliament for an independent commission against corruption was Helen Haines, independent. And the person who led the movement to stop the religious discrimination bill was Rebecca Sharkey, independent. So if independents like me are in a position where there is a hung parliament after the election, and we do have even more of a position to influence the government, I think that will be a positive thing.
Under what circumstances would you back a Labor government?
I've been very clear about this from the get-go, Kieran. I stand for action on climate change, effective and immediate action on climate change, and I feel that we have to have a federal ICAC. We need to take action on the lack of transparency in this country. Those are the two things that I would negotiate on with both of the major parties.
I believe we should have a Commonwealth Integrity Commission, and that is the government's position. It's an integrity commission that I put more than $100 million into the budget for.
In terms of this plan for an ICAC, Mr Frydenberg tells us he's put $100 million into it. The amount that was allotted for an ICAC in the most recent budget was $0. So saying that there's some commitment to that is patently false. Mr Morrison told us earlier this week he doesn't believe that we need an ICAC. And I think the reason this government thinks that we don't need an ICAC is that it knows what we will find. If we look at JobKeeper again, if we get back to JobKeeper, $88 billion, we were the only country in the developed world that had a stimulus scheme like that did not have transparency about where the money went. What I have found out is that Crown Casino, which had 15,000 employees, received $115 million in JobKeeper. But universities, which have 130,000 employees, none. Gina Reinhardt's old school, St Hilda's in Perth, $4.8 million in JobKeeper. In Perth. Remember how much COVID Perth had? That's the first time COVID's been said in the last hour. Very little. And so while Gina Reinhardt's school is getting $4.8 million in 2020, I'm leading a public hospital with an annual budget of $3.5 million to look after 45 staff and thousands of patients during an unprecedented pandemic. So what we need is transparency about the government spending and where they put our hard-earned at a time where we are really struggling from an economic point of view.
He's already dead.
My question to you both, but to Dr Ryan first, if I could please, is what's your policy on nuclear weapons?
The legacy of Mr Frydenberg's government is going to be a toxic miasma of division, disappointment and debt. This government has done nothing good for us in the last 9 years. For Mr. Frydenberg, politics is about power. For me, it's about people.
So who won? Debates are so subjective, but I'd have given the points to Dr. Ryan. Is my bias showing? With pre-polling opening up, Frydenberg's calling in all the favours. Whether that'll be enough to get him over the line though, time will tell. If the people of Kooyong are serious about taking action on climate change and restoring integrity to government, then they'll show him the door and point him back in the direction of New South Wales.